what His Holiness did emphasize was that, you know, he always kind of makes it as a joke, but it's quite a serious comment actually, that His Holiness jokes with his friends from, you know, the Theravada, the countries where they follow Theravada Buddhism, like Sri Lanka and Burma and Thailand, there are many who come to receive teachings from His Holiness, and His Holiness always treats them with great respect and is very happy, you know, to engage with them. But he was saying that oftentimes he teases them that, you know, the Pali canon or the Pali tradition is kind of like a person without teeth, that they can chew, that because they follow Buddha's teaching based on faith, they just accept whatever the Buddha taught out of faith, and they don't really have reason and logic to be able to distinguish interpretive from definitive teachings of the Buddha. So they're kind of like a person without teeth that can't chew tough food, right? They can't, they have a difficult time interpreting the very difficult kind of contradictions in the Buddhist teachings. Whereas the Sanskrit tradition, because they have this text on valid cognition, on pramana, by Dignaga and Dharmakirti and so forth, then they're able to use very sharp logic and reasoning, kind of critical thinking, to distinguish the interpretive from the definitive teachings of the Buddha, and thereby make sense of these very difficult kind of apparent contradictions in different aspects of the Buddhist teachings. And then His Holiness said, because we are Asians, we're followers of the Nalanda tradition, then we need to, you know, practice or uphold the entire tradition, which includes these texts on logic and valid cognition. And then he gave the example of how Shantarakshita was the first Nalanda scholar to spread Buddhism in Tibet, and he was a great scholar of logic. He composed a very thorough commentary on, I believe, I'm not sure, either Dharmakirti or Dignaga's main text on logic. And then over 1,000 years, Tibetans have, you know, practiced study, contemplation, and meditation on, you know, the Buddhist teachings based on valid cognition and logic. And then His Holiness was saying, in his lifetime, he's had the opportunity and the good fortune to be able to, you know, engage in dialogue with science. And so this logical understanding of the Buddhist teachings has been a great help at that time. You know, in the past, Tibetan, you know, scholars didn't have access or didn't have exposure to science. But now His Holiness has made a lot of effort, and now in the monasteries, they're also studying science. So he hopes that this dialogue between Buddhism and science will continue into the future, because there's many similarities, like in quantum physics. His Holiness mentions again and again and again, quantum physics analysis of what form is extremely similar to the middle way consequentialist analysis. That when you search in the basis of imputation, you get down, you know, you get to more and more subtle levels, and then finally you find that things are imputed by the mind. They exist independent upon, you know, in terms of quantum physics, the most subtle particles, they exist, you know, either in a wave or a particle state, independent upon the act of observation. Apart from the act of observation, it cannot be determined where, you know, these finite particles are and whether they're in a wave state or if they're in a particle state, right? So they're dependent arising, and they depend upon, you know, the act of observation, which is very close to depending on mental imputation. So then His Holiness was saying mental happiness cannot be bought in stores, right? It doesn't come about through improving our, you know, our food, clothes, and so forth, our external facilities, but it comes about by transforming our mind. So we need to have resolve to do that, to transform our minds. So then he was talking to the Indonesians, saying, you should also try to, so this applies to all of us followers of His Holiness, we should also try to engage in dialogue with science, because on one hand, we can learn some things about science. On the other hand, scientists can learn a lot from Buddhism about, you know, how the mind works and the different aspects of the mind, how the afflictive emotions arise, and how to reduce them, how to increase love, loving kindness and compassion, and how there's different levels of subtlety of the mind. And then His Holiness talked a little bit about this phenomenon of tukdam, you know, where after a person's heart stops beating at the time of death, that there's subtle levels of consciousness can remain in the heart chakra. And so although there's no blood flow through the brain, then the brain's not functioning, but still the mind remains and keeps the body in a state. It's quite fresh. So His Holiness was saying now, through dialogue with science over many years, many scientists are changing their view about what the mind is and to what degree it depends upon the brain or doesn't, and about the possibility of increasing and enhancing loving kindness and compassion and other positive attitudes. And then His Holiness was just commenting on the method of study. The traditional method of study in Tibet is really good, where you memorize root text. His Holiness was talking about the different root texts that he memorized when he was young, where you memorize different root texts, and then you study and receive explanation of different commentaries on those texts, and then you debate about the meaning of those texts using logic and reasoning, and then on that basis you meditate. So he's saying this is a very effective way of studying. Okay, so that's all for His Holiness preliminary points. Maybe if there's any questions about things, any of those things, His Holiness preliminary kind of talk before he explained the actual text, I can take a couple questions now. Otherwise, we'll jump right into the texts. Dilshad. Hi, Dilshad. You should be unmuted now.
Hi, Venerable.
Hi. What's your question?
Yes, my question is, here one verse was there, no? The sages do not wash away the sins of others with water.
Mm-hmm.
That verse. Does that mean Buddha didn't practice the Tonglen meditation?
Does that mean what?
Buddha didn't practice the Tonglen meditation.
Does that mean what? That I don't understand your question. Can you say more?
Practice the Tonglen meditation. People are saying, some are saying, if you practice the Tonglen meditation, we can take other suffering like that. They are saying. So
yeah, that's generally said, right? Yeah, that's a contradiction, right? Yeah, very good. Very, very, very good question. Yeah, so it says here, sages do not wash away with water. And yet when we practice Tonglen, it seems like we're supposed to be taking on the suffering of others. So if the Buddhas can't, wash away sins with water or clear away the beings suffering with their hands by practicing Tonglen, how in the world can we? Right? Yeah. Yeah, that, Dilshad, that aspect of Tonglen, I mean, I think, when we practice Tonglen, the most important thing that we're doing is training our own mind, right? What's the purpose of practicing Tonglen? You have to think about the context of practicing Tonglen, right? It's in the context of generating bodhicitta.
Yes.
Right? To generate bodhicitta, there's two methods. There's the 7-point cause and effect method, and there's the method of exchanging self and others, right? So Tonglen is part of the method of exchanging self and others. So in the method of exchanging self and others, there's 5 steps, right? First is equalizing self and others. The second is looking at the faults of self-cherishing. The third is thinking about the benefits of cherishing others. The fourth is actually exchanging self and others. And then the fifth is practicing Tonglen. Right? So the main thing you're doing when you're practicing Tonglen is kind of combining the foregoing 4 steps. So the main purpose of practicing Tonglen, in short, is to reduce our self-cherishing mind and increase our mind that cherishes others and is concerned about others, right? And then also it's a way of combining the practices of, loving kindness and compassion, right? So when we send out all of our bodies, our merits, our body, our possessions, and imagine them transforming into things that bring benefit to other sentient beings, we're practicing love and we're practicing generosity. And then when we imagine taking on the suffering of others and it ripens up on us and destroys our self-cherishing mind, At that time, we're practicing compassion, and we're also practicing eliminating our self-cherishing mind, right? So we're reducing our self-cherishing mind, and we're increasing our concern for others. So the main purpose of Tonglen is to benefit us, right? For us to generate a more altruistic attitude. But not, I mean, it doesn't end there. It's like we are a vehicle to benefit other sentient beings, right? The long-term goal, the main goal is to benefit other sentient beings. But to benefit other sentient beings, we first have to overcome our own afflictions, right? So the source of all of our afflictions is our self-centered mind, self-cherishing mind. So Tonglen is a practice, you know, that we use to reduce our self-cherishing attitude and increase our mind cherishing others, and then on that basis generate bodhicitta. So that all is beneficial for us immediately, and you know, gradually it's beneficial for other sentient beings. So then, but then there's a big debate, yeah, that you're bringing up about, well, by practicing Tonglen, can we really take on the suffering of others or not, right? So definitely this verse, I mean, this verse is good evidence that we cannot, right? That we cannot actually take on the suffering of others. You know, sages do not wash away their sins with water. They do not clear away beings suffering with their hands. They do not transfer their knowledge to others, right? So clearly this verse would be seen to say that Tonglen is kind of like an imaginary exercise that actually you can't clear away other beings' sufferings. But then there are other stories from, especially the lives of the 80 Mahasiddhas, where it seems like they can actually take on the suffering of others. So I don't know. It's a debatable thing.
Thank you, Venerable.
Okay, you're welcome. Yeah, Maya.
Hey, I wanted to add to this actually a question that I had regarding to two things.
Yeah.
One was about when you do a Bodhisattva purification practice, it's been said that you can also do it for others. For instance, if someone from your family has passed away already, you can visualize him or her and, you know, help them through your practice. This is one regarding to this question exactly. And the other one is that at the end, you know, probably, you know, when you, for instance, for me, when I encounter His Holiness Dalai Lama, there is something that you get from this encounter that has an impact on you. It just does, and it's not, I mean, I've heard so many stories, and I've, you know, witnessed this for myself. So there is something that impacts you in this way or another. Maybe it doesn't transform your life totally, but it gives you something. So I was wondering regarding to that as well.
You're wondering like what's going on?
Like there is an impact. He cannot get me enlightened, but there is something that, you know, helps you. Have faith.
Sure. I mean, when you meet a really angry person in the street, is there an impact on you as well? Yes. I mean, there is. I mean, there's
but,
a
you
kind
know,
of
so sometimes they also,
you know, there's a kind
sometimes
of
they can
level.
guide you, you know, because they see things that you cannot see. You know, this is why we are asking questions from our gurus for guidance, for instance.
Right.
You know, and that helps us.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there's different. Other sentient beings affect us on different levels, right? So, but definitely someone like, you know, a bodhisattva, someone who's practicing with bodhicitta, practicing the bodhisattva path, the whole motivation for their every action is to benefit other sentient beings, right? So then, of course, by generating that attitude again and again and again, dedicating, making prayers, and just having that attitude in a very strong way, and then generating deeper and deeper levels of realization, especially of emptiness, then, I mean, I think just naturally your presence affects others more and more and more, right? In a more and more positive way. Yeah. So we need to look, you know, of course, we start by looking at very powerful, obvious examples of that, like with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and other lamas. But then we should also check in our own experience, you know, more and more subtle, more and more small scale levels of that same phenomena. right? And then, you know, finally look at our own experience. How do we affect others around us? Does it change as we practice? You know, as we try to practice Dharma, do we have an effect on others? Yeah, a lot of it has to do with the power of prayer. But yeah, it's kind of a big, a little bit complicated, bit of a gray area. So, you know, keep thinking about it. Okay. Stages?
Hello.
Hello.
I also want to ask about Tonglen. I read a lot of stories when great masters have a difficult sickness, and we actually get the sickness by taking on the suffering of others. Like, for example, Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So it means Tonglen can take the suffering of others. It's like an example.
Hold on, but you're saying that you've heard of great masters who have been sick themselves, and then they take on the suffering of others, and thereby they get well, right?
I'm saying that they get sickness by taking suffering on others. Actually, there is a lot of reading on internet that, for example, Lama Zopa Rinpoche also takes a lot of suffering from other people, and he gets sick because of his compassion, actually.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of one way of interpreting what's going on, but it's difficult to prove. That's what I'm saying, you know, because just because a lama gets sick, I mean, there could be different ways of explaining that. One way could be that they're taking on the suffering of others, but I don't know, it's hard. I mean, how do you prove that that's what's really happening or not? It's difficult.
Because it cannot be karma, because their karma is already pure, so they already purify their karma, so it can be only one way, logically.
Yeah, I mean, it's one way to think about it, but it could be just that they're showing that appearance in order to accord with our karma, not that they're taking on anyone's suffering, but we can only have the appearance of seeing someone with, you know, old age and sickness and so forth, and not another kind of appearance, so that they're just showing that kind of appearance so that we can interact with them. That's another kind of explanation. Anyway, let's go on to other things now. Yeah, let's go on to the text now. So we'll briefly finish up the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas. Here we are. Okay, so we're right at the end here. So we're going from verse 37. Yeah, let's see. Actually, I retranslated this verse because I don't like this translation. So here's the translation I want to look at. Thereby, in order to dispel the suffering of limitless migrating beings, dedicating all the merit gained with effort towards enlightenment by the wisdom knowing the three spheres to be pure is the practice of bodhisattvas, right? So, so remember these two verses are kind of a summary, right? 36, in brief, whatever you are doing, ask yourself, what's the state of my mind? With constant mindfulness and mental alertness, accomplish others' good. This is a practice of bodhisattvas. So that's talking about more mindfulness and alertness, more like the method side of the path. And here is talking about more the wisdom side of the path and how through wisdom we need to achieve enlightenment. So we need to dedicate in order to be able to achieve enlightenment by generating wisdom. But why do we do that? In order to free others, all sentient beings, from suffering, right? So, and that's a practice of bodhisattvas. So thereby, in order to dispel the suffering of limitless migrating beings, so that's like the motivation, then bodhisattvas dedicate all the merit they've gained with great effort towards full enlightenment. So how do they become enlightened? Towards full enlightenment by the wisdom knowing the three spheres to be pure. So the three spheres is a term that comes up a lot. It means basically the agent or the person who's engaging in action, the action itself, and the object of their action, right? So now as I'm like, you know, speaking here, then I, the person, and the speaker, the action I engage in is speaking, and then the object I'm speaking to is you all. right? So we see, you know, in any action that a person engages in, you can talk about the three spheres. So a bodhisattva always sees the three spheres as being empty of inherent existence. Yeah, and then by remembering emptiness of inherent existence, then bodhisattvas, let me close this. They gradually achieve Buddhahood, and so they dedicate for that purpose. Why? In order to benefit all sentient beings. So then there's four concluding verses here. For all who want to train in the Bodhisattva path, I have written the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas, following what has been said by the excellent ones on the meaning of the sutras, tantras, and their treatise, or their commentaries. Though not poetically pleasing to scholars, owing to my poor intelligence and lack of learning, I've relied on the sutras and the words of the excellent. So I think these Bodhisattva practices are without error. However, as the great deeds of Bodhisattvas are hard to fathom for one of my poor intelligence, I beg the excellent to forgive all faults, such as contradictions and non sequiturs. Non sequiturs means things or statements that have no relevance or are not related to the main whatever's being explained, right? It means kind of extemporaneous comments. And then through the virtue from this, may all living beings gain the ultimate and conventional altruistic intention, and thereby become like the protector Chenrezig, who dwells in neither extreme, nor in the world. Say not in the world and not in peace. So here it means that Chenrezig does not dwell in either extreme. So he doesn't remain in samsara, you know, under the control of afflictive emotions and karma, and he also doesn't remain in a state of peace whereby he's not doing anything to benefit sentient beings. So this is, I think I mentioned yesterday or the day before, that a Buddha, they achieve a state, a kind of nirvana that's called non-abiding nirvana. So it means they don't abide in peace, and they also don't abide in samsara. So then this is the colophon. This was written for his own and his benefit by the monk Thokme, an exponent of scripture and reasoning in the cave called Muchu Rinchen. So this cave is a place that Thokme Sangpo spent a lot of time, so that's why he's called Muchu Thokme Sangpo. So again, this was translated by Ruth Sonam, I think together with Geshe Sonam Rinchen. So that is that text. All right, and then His Holiness went to the three principal aspects on the path. So let's look at that. So we continued from the verses on renunciation. So remember yesterday, His Holiness read these two verses. Let's see if I can enlarge a little bit. How to generate renunciation. The freedoms and endowments are difficult to find, and life has no time to spare. By gaining familiarity with this, attraction to the appearances of this life are reversed, or attraction to the appearances of this life is reversed. By thinking over and over, so this is the small scope, and then this is more like the middle scope. By thinking over and over again that actions and their effects are unbetraying, and repeatedly contemplating the miseries of cyclic existence, or samsara, attraction to the appearances of future lives is reversed. So that we spoke about yesterday. And then today His Holiness explained this, the definition of having generated renunciation. When, by having trained in this way, so it means the way just described above in these verses, when having trained in that way, there is no arising, even for a second, of attraction to the perfections of cyclic existence. So it here means the pleasures of cyclic existence, the things that seem attractive in cyclic existence. So when having trained in the way above, looking at the faults of, you know, thinking about the good fortune of having this precious human life, thinking how it won't last long and death is certain to come, and the time of death is uncertain, and how at the time of death only the Dharma will benefit, right? And then thinking about how karma, the law of cause and effect, is definite, it's unbetraying, and how, you know, whatever kind of rebirth we take in samsara will experience manifold difficulties and problems. eventually, right? So thinking about all that, then, so when by having trained in that way, there is no arising even for a second of attraction to the perfections of cyclic existence, and all day and night, the intention seeking liberation, so it means seeking nirvana, seeking freedom from samsara, arises. So it arises continuously, day and night. Then the thought, so at that time, the thought of renunciation has been generated. So when we, in debate in the monastery, when we define renunciation, usually we use the last two lines of this verse, where basically renunciation means when day and night continuously and spontaneously in your mind is arising, the longing for liberation from samsara, right? And you have no attachment whatever to pleasures of samsara. So that is essentially what renunciation is. When all day and night the intention seeking liberation arises, then the thought of renunciation is generated. So that's it for renunciation. And the next verses go on to explain about bodhicitta. The purpose of generating the mind of enlightenment first, even if renunciation has been developed, if it is not possessed or means not accompanied by the mind of enlightenment, it does not become the cause of the perfect bliss of unsurpassed enlightenment, right? So it means even if we have renunciation and practice renunciation perfectly, if that renunciation is not conjoined with or not accompanied by the attitude of bodhicitta, then we can never achieve the perfect well-being or the perfect joy and happiness of full enlightenment. Therefore, the wise generate the supreme mind of enlightenment, right? So it's kind of a strange verse actually, because usually we think the whole purpose of generating bodhicitta is to be of greater benefit to other sentient beings. But here it's saying the purpose of generating bodhicitta is because if we don't, we won't have the happiness of full enlightenment. So it's strange. It seems a little bit lacking in altruistic attitude a little bit. But anyway, we know that it's important to know that the whole purpose of achieving enlightenment is to benefit others. So then how to generate the mind of enlightenment, of bodhicitta? So it's this, we read yesterday, briefly explained, His Holiness briefly explained yesterday. Swept away by the current of 4 powerful rivers. So remember that means old age, sickness, birth, the sufferings of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Tied by the tight bonds of karma, so hard to undo. So this is referring to how karma, as long as we create contaminated karma through the force of ignorance, attachment, anger, and so forth, then we'll definitely experience the results of that. There's no way around that. So then that way we're bound by our karma. And we're caught in the iron net of self-grasping. So here means probably more like selfishness here, selfish concern, and then completely or grasping at the self of persons. And then we're completely enveloped by the total darkness of ignorance. So here's more referring to the ignorance which grasps at the inherent existence of all phenomena. And then endlessly born in cyclic existence. So as long as we're not free from ignorance grasping at true existence, then we continually give rise to afflictive emotions, and thereby we create karma, thereby we take rebirth again and again and again in samsara without end, right? So endlessly reborn in cyclic existence. And then as long as we're in cyclic existence, we continually experience the 3 sufferings, which are what? The suffering of suffering, the suffering of change, and pervasive compounding suffering. So there's no moment, as long as we're in samsara, there's no moment we're not experiencing one of those 3 forms of suffering, right? Thereby thinking that all my kind mothers sentient beings, so remember as Holiness mentioned yesterday, thinking that I'm in such a condition, generate the mind of renunciation. Thinking that all my kind mothers sentient beings are in such a condition, generate the supreme mind of enlightenment, wishing to free them from samsara. And then I wanted to mention yesterday, there's this phrase that His Holiness often uses in Tibetan, where when he's describing what bodhicitta is, where he says, in terms of bodhicitta, bodhicitta is accompanied by a wisdom mind which observes full enlightenment, right, and strives to achieve full enlightenment. And then it's accompanied by an aspirational mind which observes the welfare of sentient beings and wishes to accomplish the welfare of sentient beings, right? So bodhicitta is accompanied by both a wisdom mind and an aspirational mind, I mean, usually it's described that bodhicitta is described, it's accompanied by two different aspirations. But there's this phrase in Tibetan where it's described like that bodhicitta is accompanied by the wisdom which observes complete enlightenment, or full enlightenment, and an aspiration which aspires to accomplish the welfare of sentient beings. So what it means is bodhicitta is essentially seeing the suffering of sentient beings and wishing to accomplish their welfare, which means accomplish their freedom from suffering. Then we think, what can I do? And the wisdom mind realizes I have to achieve full enlightenment, right? And then strive to achieve full enlightenment. So then the definition of having generated the mind of enlightenment or bodhicitta, in short, if like the mother who cherishes her child, let's see, if like the mother whose cherished child has fallen into a pit of fire and who experiences even 1 second of the child's suffering as an unbearable eternity, your reflection on the suffering of all mother sentient beings has made it impossible for you to bear the suffering for even 1 second. And the wish seeking enlightenment for their sake arises without effort, right? So it should become effortless. And you have realized the supreme precious, then you have realized the supreme precious mind of bodhicitta. So in short, we've actually generated bodhicitta when that mind arises spontaneously and continuously without effort, right? In our mind. Either, it's either manifest in our mind or it's at a dormant or subconscious kind of level, but it's always present in the mind. So that's it for bodhicitta. And now we turn to these 4 verses on emptiness, right? So first, the reason to meditate on emptiness. Without the wisdom realizing ultimate reality, even though you have generated renunciation and the mind of enlightenment or bodhicitta, you cannot cut the root of circling, of cyclic resistance or of samsara. Therefore, attempt the method to realize dependent arising, right? So first of all, it's saying that, even if you generate renunciation and bodhicitta, without having realized the ultimate reality, without having realized emptiness, you still can't be free from even samsara, not to mention full enlightenment. So you have to realize emptiness. You have to realize ultimate truth or the ultimate reality in order to be free from samsara and also to achieve full enlightenment. But then the last line is kind of peculiar, right? Because he says, therefore, attempt the method. Actually, this is a little bit strange translation. Actually, it means more like, therefore, put effort into the method for realizing dependent arising, right? So why is it strange though? Because it's saying, without realizing ultimate truth, ultimate reality, which means emptiness, right? Without realizing emptiness, you can't be free from samsara. So it would seem that it should say at the last line should be, therefore, strive or make effort in the method to realize emptiness, right? But instead of saying, strive in the method to realize emptiness, it says strive in the method to realize dependent arising, right? So that's very meaningful, actually. That kind of anomaly, the point right at the beginning of this presentation, emptiness. That the best method to achieve realization of emptiness or to realize emptiness is to use the sign of dependent arising, right? Whether you use the analysis of the 7-point analysis or the 4-point analysis or analysis of, one and many or production from self and other, those are all different forms of dependent arising, or different kinds of reasoning in employing the reasoning of dependent arising. So Tsongkhapa is saying that make effort to realize emptiness by relying on the sign of dependent arising. So this prayer, this is probably one of the most, this prayer, the 3 principal aspects of the path, it's, if you compare it to the foundation of all good qualities, the foundation of all good qualities is excellent in that it presents the entire path from guru devotion at the beginning, right up to the practices of Tantra, the generation and completion stage at the end, right? It has I think, three verses on Tantra at the end. So the foundation of all good qualities, it doesn't have the practice of guru devotion at the beginning, and it doesn't have anything about Tantra at the end. So it doesn't present the entire path, but it emphasizes the main points of the path. So on each of those three main points, it has more detailed description. So especially on emptiness, you know, in the foundation of all good qualities, there's like 1 or 2 lines about emptiness only. Right here, there are 4 complete verses about emptiness. So there's a much more detailed presentation of emptiness. And so in the context of explaining this first verse on emptiness, His Holiness quoted this verse from by Nagarjuna from the Fundamental Wisdom. Whatever is, let me blow it up a little bit larger. Whatever is dependently arisen, that is explained to be emptiness. That being a dependent origination is itself the middle way. So that being means emptiness itself being a dependent origination is the middle way. Because there is nothing whatsoever that is not dependently arisen, therefore there is nothing whatsoever that is not empty. Right. So again, I suggest you download this document. So this contains all the verses that is, you know, in the first, second, and third day. Not all the verses, but most of the verses that His Holiness has cited are in here. So, and it's a good reference for the future. His Holiness quotes these same verses. Like this verse, His Holiness quotes again and again and again. He recommends that we all meditate on it every day. These 2 verses, and then also His Holiness. So in this explanation of Tsongkhapa's of the 3 principal aspects of the path, His Holiness just kind of very briefly and quickly quoted a lot of different verses. So another one he mentioned was these 2. He mainly just mentioned the second verse of these 2, but we can read the whole thing. Just as the body sense power pervades the body, ignorance is present in all the afflictive emotions. By overcoming ignorance, you will also overcome all afflictive emotions. When dependent arising is seen, ignorance will not occur. Therefore, make effort in every way to realize just this teaching. So this is by Aryadeva. So basically he's saying all the afflictive emotions, like attachment, anger, jealousy, arrogant pride, and so forth, they all arise, they're pervaded by, so they're accompanied by, and they arise from ignorance grasping at true existence. And how do we eliminate that ignorance grasping at true existence? By reflecting upon dependent arising very deeply. So therefore, strive in every way to be mindful of, to realize dependent arising. So that's another verse that His Holiness recommends we memorize, recite, and meditate on every day. Okay, this verse is coming. It's not. I'll go back to Tsongkhapa's prayer. So let's go. So here, Tsongkhapa gave the reason for generating the right view and pointing out that the best method to generate emptiness is to analyze dependent arising. So then he shows what the right view is, roughly. Phenomena of both cyclic existence and the state beyond sorrow, as forever unbetraying, and for whom any object trusted in by the grasp. So he sees that, you know, the law of cause and effect, karma, you know, that law is unbetraying, and that also just the way things work in the world, you know, that similar causes produce effects that are similar to those causes. You know, it's not the case that any cause produces any kind of effect. You know, for example, it's not the case that, I'm already going over time. It's not the case that anything arises from anything else, but certain causes produce other certain kinds of effects. And that's very systematic. And so one who sees that cause and effect of all phenomena of both cyclic existence and the state beyond sorrow as forever unbetraying, and for whom any object trusted in by the grasping mind has completely disappeared. So any object, so they don't grasp at any object as inherently existing, right? So for whom any object trusted in by the grasping mind, means grasping at inherent existence, has completely disappeared. So they don't grasp at inherent existence whatsoever. So a person has at that time entered the path pleasing the Buddhas, right? So, it's, once you first realize emptiness, then you then you cultivate that understanding more and more. So then he describes kind of an incomplete analysis of emptiness, right? The definition of not having completed the analysis of the right view. If the appearance that is unbetraying dependent relation is accepted separately from emptiness, as long as these two understandings are seen as separate, then one has not realized the Buddha's intent, right? So what it means here is, if we see that, the way phenomena, the way causes produce effects, yes, that's unbetraying. But that phenomena of the way causes and effects interact is something different than emptiness. That emptiness means basically not asserting anything to be the case, just not making any assertions about anything, right? Then, it's like if our understanding of emptiness is something completely separate from our understanding of dependent origination, then that's a mistake, right? That's not a complete analysis. So rather it should be like, as we see dependent arising, the way causes produce effects, the way things change, the way we impute phenomena. So the way phenomena exist as dependent arisings, dependent upon parts, dependent upon causes and conditions, dependent upon many invitation. So that understanding of dependent arising should itself give way to an understanding of emptiness. It should help produce and increase our understanding of emptiness, right? So, and then when we see things as empty of inherent existence, that itself should reinforce and remind us of the fact that things are dependent arising. So those two understandings should be totally conjoined, where it's said like, dependent arising appears as the meaning of emptiness. Emptiness appears as the meaning of dependent arising, right? So that's what's expressed in the following verse. So when those two things seem separate, when those two things seem separate, then our analysis is incomplete. So in the next verse, Tsongkhapa describes a complete analysis. If these two realizations are happening simultaneously without alteration, so it means these two realizations, so look above, the appearance that is unbetraying dependent relation, and the understanding of emptiness. So when these two realizations are simultaneous, are happening simultaneously without alteration, and from merely seeing dependent relation as completely unbetraying, right? So from seeing things dependent arising as completely unbetraying, by seeing that, the definite ascertainment comes that completely destroys the way all objects are apprehended as truly existent. At that time, the analysis of the ultimate view is complete. Right, so here, in the course of explaining this, His Holiness quoted quite a few verses. So first, there's another verse by Nagarjuna, and I'm running out of time, so I'll just kind of have to rush through these, and then I'll just ask where you guys have questions, and I can kind of focus on that. But so in Fundamental Wisdom, Nagarjuna says, if the self were the aggregates, it would have arising and ceasing as its properties. So basically, at the time we die, our five aggregates cease to exist, right? So our body and mind are not conjoined anymore, especially our physical aggregate ceases. So if the self was the aggregates, just as the aggregates are dispersed at death and thereby cease to exist, we would also cease to exist. There'd be no past and future life. Right? So if the self were the aggregates, it would have arising and ceasing as its properties. If it were different from the aggregates, it would not have the characteristics of the aggregates. right? And then from Chandikirtis, entering the middle way. Thus, when such phenomena are analyzed, nothing is found as their nature apart from suchness. So the conventional truth of everyday world should not be subjected to thorough analysis. This is Holiness quoted in the last teaching on dependent arising as well. Most of these he quoted then as well. This is by Nagarjuna. Now that the aggregates, so this is another verse His Holiness suggests that we memorize and meditate on every day. Not that the aggregates, nor different from the aggregates. The aggregates are not him, nor is he in the aggregates. The Tathagata does not possess the aggregates. What is the Tathagata? So His Holiness suggests we replace Tathagata here with me, with oneself, our I. And then in entering the middle way, yeah, I think, yeah, His Holiness quoted this earlier. And then there's taking the Bodhisattva vows we came to. So yeah, I'll just finish up reading. Three principal aspects of the path. So this special quality of the Prasangika view. Furthermore, appearance eliminates the extreme of existence, and emptiness eliminates the extreme of non-existence. If you realize how emptiness manifests in a manner of cause and effect, then you are not captivated by wrong notions holding extreme views. So essentially these first two lines, they mean that, you know, furthermore, appearance, when we realize that whatever appears to our mind is a dependent arising, by realizing that it is a dependent arising, then and that dependent arising, something being a dependent arising, is inconsistent with it inherently existing, right? It existing independently from anything else. Thereby, that understanding eliminates the extreme of existence, which means the extreme of inherent existence. And then when we reflect on emptiness and we realize emptiness itself is also a dependent arising. You know, what is emptiness? It's the lack of inherent existence. So what does that mean? That something lacks inherent existence? It means that it is a dependent arising. So when we see that, then that understanding that emptiness implies dependent arising, and that implies existence, then our understanding of emptiness refutes the extreme of non-existence, right? So His Holiness pointed out here how if we don't use the reasoning of dependent arising to establish emptiness, but we just meditate on emptiness using some other reason, right? And we just meditate on emptiness. The more we meditate on emptiness, it tends to weaken our confidence in and our certainty about the conventional phenomena, you know, about merely imputed phenomena. So we start to lean towards, there's a danger that we start to fall into the extreme of nihilism, that nothing exists. So the big, you know, advantage of understanding emptiness through the reasoning of dependent arising is that the reasoning of dependent arising, while it also establishes emptiness and thereby refutes the extreme of inherent existence, because dependent arising also implies that something exists, then it protects us from falling into nihilism, right? So again, there's this idea that emptiness and dependent arising are mutually supportive. They're two sides of the same coin. And that's the best way to discover the middle way view. And then finally, the final verse here. In this way, you realize exactly the vital points of the three principal aspects of the path. Resort to seeking solitude and generate the power of effort and quickly accomplish your final goal, my child. Actually, it means like when in this way, you realize exactly the vital points of the three principal aspects of the path. Resort to solitude, generate the power of effort, and quickly accomplish your final goal, my child. So here Tsongkhapa is speaking very affectionately to his disciple who requested this teaching, whose name is, so this is the colophon. This teachings by the virtue beggar, Gelong Losang Drakpa, who had extensive listening, were composed as advice for the nephew of Hompo Ngawan Drakpa. I don't think that's right. It was composed for Tsakpo Ngawan Drakpa, is the person it's composed for. I'm not sure what the nephew is doing there. It's for Tsakpo Ngawan Drakpa. Anyway, so you have, what questions do you have? There was a question in the chat first, actually. Oops, let's just share instead of chat. Come on. Hi, Venerable. Okay, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. Okay, 1 minute. I'm coming to you guys. There's this one question from Magnolia G. May I ask why the Dalai Lama suddenly started to talk about the Bodhisattva grounds? In my notes, it came after discussion of the antidotes. It seemed to be a jump from what he had been discussing. So I was wondering if there was a subtle reason that could be elucidated that I have missed. I'm not sure where you're talking about exactly, but I don't think there wasn't any subtle, I mean, it's all kind of subtle, but I don't think there wasn't any kind of mystery hidden point that I noticed. You know, if His Holiness was discussing the antidotes and then discussing the Bodhisattva grounds, yeah, he was discussing, I think, how we have to understand the antidotes and then understand how those can be applied, especially wisdom realizing emptiness can be used to abandon or eliminate the two kinds of obscurations, right? Afflictive obscurations, which are abandoned on the first 7 of the 10 grounds, and then the knowledge obscurations that are abandoned on the 3 pure grounds, the 8th, 9th, and 10th ground. His Holiness did go through that briefly. And then antonym. So someone asks, is it theoretically, so I'll ask you guys, what do you think? You know, you old students, Joya and Maya and Dilshad, I want to hear your answer to this. Is it possible to directly realize emptiness without having realized bodhicitta, or even without renunciation? What do you think? I'll unmute you.
There has been saying that you can realize emptiness without bodhicitta.
Can you directly realize emptiness? A, without bodhicitta, and B, without renunciation. Joy, you're
without
unmuted.
renunciation, I don't know. Without bodhicitta, there's been said that yes. I mean, because when you are our heart, okay, you get emptiness.
Okay, that's okay. Just yes or no answer. Joya?
Doesn't it refer to Pratyeka Buddhas and other arhats being able to realize it?
What?
Without necessarily generating bodhicitta?
Is that an answer or a question?
Yeah, it's a question, doesn't it?
I'm asking for answers, not questions.
To the Pratyeka Buddha paths, or even the Shravaka paths in Mandalay.
No, is it, hold on, can a person
directly realize emptiness?
No, Maya, okay. Joya, can a person directly realize emptiness without having bodhicitta or without having renunciation?
That's what I'm asking. Couldn't it?
No, I'm asking you. No, that's
well, I thought a person could mean the Pratyeka Buddha or the Shravaka.
Yeah, they can be.
They do.
They do what?
Become arhat.
They do, yeah.
I mean, get.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Dilshad, you have an answer?
Yes, Venerable.
Do you want to answer? Do you want to try to answer?
Yes. They can realize emptiness.
Without bodhicitta and without renunciation?
Yes.
Okay. Well, okay, to directly realize emptiness of the 5 paths, what path does a person have to have achieved? They have to have achieved the path of seeing, right? So they have to be on a path. They have to have already achieved the path of accumulation and the path of preparation. At the moment a person first directly realizes emptiness, they achieve the path of seeing. There's no other way. So they have to be on a path, right? To be on a path, you have to have renunciation. You cannot have renunciation and be on any path. right? Renunciation is the minimum requirement for achieving the path of accumulation, right? You either have to generate, if you achieve renunciation and without bodhicitta, then you enter the Hinayana path. If you first achieve bodhicitta, actual bodhicitta, then at that time you enter the Mahayana path, and you necessarily generate renunciation together with it. So you cannot directly realize emptiness without renunciation. So that was Sages just said no way, right? But it's not clear if it's referring to bodhicitta or renunciation. Yes, Maya, wait 1 minute, let's see. So you can directly realize emptiness without having bodhicitta, as is Joya mentioned, as is the case with solitary realizers and Pratyeka Buddhas. They directly realize emptiness, but they don't have bodhicitta. That's definite. But you cannot directly realize emptiness without renunciation. You have to have. So is that clear? No, Maya.
I have a question regarding the renunciation part, because it takes, okay, when you have attachment, right, you do not have renunciation. Yeah. But yet attachment is one of the last things that you get rid of when you become a Buddha. So you don't have a full renunciation in a way, no?
No and no, both.
Why?
Just because you have renunciation doesn't mean you don't have attachment. Just because you have attachment doesn't mean you don't have renunciation. You can have both.
But when you have attachment, means that you didn't renunciate completely things, isn't it? Oh, you got stuck. Felipe?
We lost Venerable Legtsok. He will reconnect. Hold on. It seems his internet went out. Let's wait a couple of minutes and see if he can reconnect, or maybe his computer died. He said he didn't have much battery.
Yeah, maybe he needs to go to the other room with the mosquitoes.
Yep. There he is.
Found him.
What were you saying?
You're back.
What was it?
What was the question?
Yeah, I forgot what we were talking about.
We were talking about the fact that when you have attachment, so it, for me, and the way I see it, it contradicts renunciation, because when you renounce, I don't know, it's just how I see it, and you only have really, as far as I understood, get rid of attachment just before you become Buddha. So it seems like maybe you have, I don't know, some renunciation in order for you to become, to realize emptiness. I don't know, it feels that there is some contradictions within this, because if you are in our heart, so you're not a Buddha yet and you're not enlightened yet. So I'm just, there is something that doesn't click.
Hold on. Yeah, if you're an arhat, means you've abandoned all the afflictive obscurations, but not the knowledge obscurations, right? Because you've achieved nirvana.
Mm-hmm.
So you've abandoned attachment, you've abandoned ignorance, grasping at true existence, but you haven't abandoned the subtle imprints of those, right? So if you're an arhat, yeah, you've abandoned attachment. You don't have any attachment. But you know, when you first generate renunciation, you can still have attachment. I mean, it's not that renunciation isn't manifest in your mind all the time, right? So you might still generate some kind of, you know, weak forms of attachment to different things that are manifest in the mind temporarily, but you still have, you know, renunciation in your mind. You can still have some attachment to things in samsara. So you gradually strengthen your renunciation more and more and more, and then you know, it's not clear at what point the person no longer has attachment arise, you know, so that it's manifest in the mind. But
so then can you still
that
realize
happens
emptiness
long before you abandon it.
so then you can still realize emptiness via having attachment in this way or another?
Well, I mean, you wouldn't say via having attachment, because I mean they're contradictory to one another. I mean, it's not like, you know, independence upon attachment you realize empty. It's not like attachment helps you realize emptiness, right? It's
not in that regard. In the regard of the renunciation.
With regard to renunciation?
Yes.
What do you mean?
So you still didn't completely renunciate, but you did understood emptiness. I mean, it just sounds there is something.
Yeah, you can generate strong renunciation without having realized emptiness. It's possible, but not usually the way. For most, you know, I mean, with bodhicitta, most bodhisattvas, they realize emptiness first, and then they realize bodhicitta. Then they generate bodhicitta. But some who are much more, they practice much more by means of faith. Then they generate bodhicitta first, you know, kind of more, yeah, and then they're similar. For most people, you know, especially with more intelligence, stronger kind of logical way of thinking, more intelligence, then they generate realization of emptiness first, and then based on that generate renunciation, right?
Mm. Mm. Interesting.
Anyway, this is all described in the paths and grounds. You have to study paths and grounds. I think there's in the chat, there's a question here. So someone in the chat says, or on Facebook says, but the paths only relate to bodhisattvas. A meditator on emptiness is not necessarily on any path. Well, first is not right. The paths relate to not only bodhisattvas, but also to pratyeka Buddhas and solitary realizers. I mean, solitary realizers are pratyeka Buddhas. No. Yeah, solitary realizers are pratyeka Buddhas. I mean, hearers and solitary realizers. So there's three different groups of paths. There's the paths of solitary realizers. There's the paths of hearers, the paths of solitary realizers, and the paths of bodhisattvas, right? There's three different paths. I mean, and then each of those consists of five, you know, the path of accumulation, preparation, seeing, meditation, no more learning. So it's not to be on a path, you don't have to be a bodhisattva. And then a meditator on emptiness is not necessarily on any path. Yeah, that's true. I mean, we can meditate on emptiness. You know, what does it mean to meditate on emptiness? To actually meditate on emptiness, of course, means, yeah, you at least probably generate a correct belief of you know, with regard to emptiness. But you know, but when we try to the best of our ability to understand emptiness, we can say we're meditating on emptiness, although we don't have an actual mind realizing it. But even for a person who's actually realized emptiness, yeah, they're not necessarily on any path. That's true. But they would be very soon after they realize emptiness. They wouldn't be long. You know, you imagine if you realize emptiness, then it's very easy to generate renunciation. And yeah, more difficult to generate bodhicitta. So then the same person saying, in a moment of clarity and non-attachment, the realization of emptiness may occur despite the practitioner not having a pervasive sense of renunciation in the true sense of the word. Yeah, that's true. A person can realize emptiness without having actual renunciation. Yeah, I agree. Okay, Maya, you have another question? Hold on, I'll give the others the opportunity first. You others, do you have any other questions before we go back to Maya? Okay, Joya, yeah, I saw you raising your hand earlier too. Yes, Joya, coming to you.
No, I just wanted to ask if, where do we download those? You said you should download them. So where do we download them from?
Felipe, can you explain?
Text that you have for the teachings today.
Yeah, Joya, I sent you here in the chat the link to the Google Drive folder. I replied to that message you sent in the beginning where this translation, and I sent you the link of the Google Drive so you can download them. All of them are there.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Joya, I'm also on the the FPMD India WhatsApp group. If you can't get it, you can I can email it to you.
Oh, okay, great. All right.
Okay, Maya, back to you.
No, I was just agreeing with the fact that no. I was just agreeing with that. What was saying at the end, that you can realize emptiness without having yeah.
Yeah.
But of course, when you realize emptiness, then you have renunciation. I mean, of course, I don't know, I've never had it,
yeah.
But I mean, theoretically speaking, you should.
The reason specifically for that you can realize emptiness before generating bodhicitta and before generating renunciation. Hold on, but first, just to clarify, because some of you probably have become confused. The first question was about directly realizing emptiness, not just realizing emptiness, right?
Those are just gonna say that I was confused about that.
Okay.
Yeah, those are two completely different things. First, you intellectually realize emptiness, or you generate an inferential cognizer realizing emptiness. So that's a conceptual realization of emptiness. And then much later, much later, you generate a direct realization of emptiness, which is non-conceptual, right? That's a much higher level of realization, right? So the first question was about directly realizing emptiness. To directly realize emptiness, do you necessarily have bodhicitta or renunciation? So there I was saying, you don't necessarily have bodhicitta, but you definitely have to have renunciation to directly realize emptiness, non-conceptually, right? But now we're talking about conceptually realizing emptiness. So that's long before. To have a conceptual realization of emptiness or an inferential cognizer realizing emptiness, you do not have to have bodhicitta and you do not have to have renunciation. So the question, why, right? Think about it like this. So the person, this kind of meditator, this kind of person who first realizes emptiness before they have renunciation or bodhicitta, what would their mentality be? So their mentality would be such that, okay, the Buddhists, they talk about it's possible to be free from samsara. But until I really know that for sure, I don't believe it, right? So this is for a very skeptical person. A person who, until they know something is possible, they don't have a wish to achieve that, because they think that that's just superfluous. That's just kind of fantasy thinking. That's just a pipe dream. Until I really know enlightenment is possible, what's the point of generating the aspiration to achieve it if I don't even know it's actually possible? Until I know that it's really possible to be free from samsara, why do I want to get caught up in this fantasy that oh, I'm going to achieve freedom from samsara, It's like, if you're a child and you don't really know, if you can be a fighter or firefighter or not, but you just think, yeah, I want to be an astronaut and fly to the moon because, I like it, without really knowing, if that's actually possible, right? not to belittle kids that have that aspiration. That's great. But it's kind of an analogy. I'm just trying to make it an analogy. Right? So, So for this kind of very skeptical person, which is, I mean, a very intelligent person in a way, is that they don't generate an aspiration to achieve something before they really know it's possible. Well, first they really investigate, is it possible to achieve a complete, the truth of cessation, right? Or not, freedom from samsara or not. Is it really possible? So before they really know it's possible, they won't generate the aspiration. So they won't generate renunciation before they've investigated what it actually is the fundamental cause of samsara. So first they find that, oh, the fundamental cause is this ignorance grasping at true existence. Then they realize, well, that's a wrong view, that kind of person, existing from their own side, that doesn't actually exist whatsoever. So then they realize emptiness. And then once they're certain about, the fact that, the fundamental cause of samsara is a wrong consciousness, grasping at, and that actually the thing that consciousness grasps on, the truly existent person or inherently existent person, that does not exist. So then they realize emptiness, and then they generate the aspiration to achieve renunciation. I mean, to achieve freedom from samsara. Right? So it's that kind of person. So the reasoning is the same with regard to full enlightenment. Yeah, why don't we stop our conversation here and meditate a little bit, and then we'll have time for a little bit of discussion group at the end. So yeah, so kind of take a few deep breaths, get comfortable, stand up if you need to, and then sit back down, move around. So gradually gather your attention within. Focus, take a minute and focus on an object of placement meditation, either your own mind or your breath or something. Try to clear your mind a little bit and focus your attention. So what I'd like to meditate on here for about 10 minutes or so is this one of the most important things in Buddhist teachings, and one of the most important things His Holiness has been talking about again and again, is this connection between the afflictive emotions. So let's take attachment as our example. This assertion that attachment arises from grasping at inherent existence, right? So first of all, so we'll investigate that a little bit. So just think of a time that, or an object that you're very attached to, right? Either now, there's some object you're very attached to, a person or food or reputation or, something. Either now or in the past, think of some instance of attachment that arises or has arisen in your mind. So remember that, two qualities of attachment are that the object that we're attached to, it appears we exaggerate the attractiveness of it, right? The object appears to be very attractive, and that attractiveness of the object appears to exist solely from the side of the object, that it's not an appearance that arises independent upon our mind, right? But that the object is attractive from its own side. And then we crave after that. We long to be able to use or enjoy or be conjoined with that object or possess the object, right? So is that true of your experience of attachment? So think of a specific example, some strong attachment. Is it the case that the object appears as, unrealistically attractive from its own side, and that the mind longs to be connected with the object? So then remember that attachment, so attachment necessarily has this component of longing for the object, craving for the object. But attachment arises from first what's called the incorrectly believing concept, right? So the specific kind of incorrectly believing concept that gives rise to attachment is one that perceives the object of our attachment as attractive from its own side, right? That's all, without the craving aspect. So the object appears as very pleasing and attractive to us, and we believe that that appearance exists from the side of the object, that it's not dependent upon our mind whatsoever. So see if, the instance of your own attachment, longing for something, does it arise from first perceiving the object as attractive? And then another, so to go back one step further, so this incorrectly believing concept that perceives and believes, you know, objects of attachment as being attracted from their own side. So where does that arise from? That arises from merely grasping at objects as existing from their own side, right? So before we grasp at objects as being attractive from their own side, we grasp at the object of attachment as just existing from its own side, as, you know, an object, as something that exists, that it exists by its own power or from its own side inherently, without dependence upon parts, without dependence upon causes and condition, and especially without dependence upon imputation by our mind or anyone's mind, just having its own independent reality. So is that the case for the object of your attachment? That they seem to exist from their own side or inherently? And then finally, does it seem like I, the person who experiences attachment or who has this attachment in my mind, that I exist inherently and independently from the object of my attachment? That we're two separate things that don't affect one another, right? That exist separately from one another. So does it seem that I exist from my own side, you know, as the person who has attachment, or the person who's observing or relating to this object of attachment? Okay, so let's stop there. We'll just keep this meditation very short. But this is, I mean, just to give you a taste of, this is a very, very important analysis to do. You know, whenever we have any kind of afflictive emotion, attachment or jealousy anxiety or fear, anger, to analyze, okay, first of all, what is the afflictive emotion and how is it how am I reacting to the object, with aversion or with attachment or whatever. Then what is the incorrectly believing concept that precedes that emotive reaction, right? That precedes the emotion. We either see and grasp at things as being, inherently attractive or unattractive from their own side. So is that really the case? We need to investigate. Is that the case? That say anger is always accompanied by perceiving, things appearing and us grasping at them as being unattractive from their own side. And attachment is accompanied by an incorrectly believing concept, grasping at things as being attractive from their own side. Is that really the case in one's own experience, right? And is there a sequential order, right? Where first things appear as attractive and we grasp that as being the case, and then we long to have those things or enjoy them. And so then also, is there accompanying and preceding that incorrectly believing concept, is there just grasping at things as having inherent existence, without adding on the layer of being attractive or unattractive, just things existing from their own side, apart from concepts, apart from causes and conditions, apart from parts and being imputed upon as a collection of parts. Is there grasping at things inherently existing? And then together with that, is there a grasping at me as inherently existing, as something separate from objects that I experience? All right. Anyway, let's break up into discussion groups now of, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 1 of 2 and 1 of 3. Felipe?
Yeah. But yeah.
For just, I don't know, 8 minutes?
8 minutes? Okay.
Yeah. So discuss whatever you guys want.
Okay, I'm starting them now.
Sometimes. And then rejoice in all the merit accumulated by Shakyamuni Buddha and all of our gurus and all of the great Buddhist masters, from Shakyamuni Buddha on down to His Holiness the Dalai Lama and our other gurus. And then rejoice in all the merit created by all sentient beings, ordinary beings, Arya beings, arhats, and so forth. So all this merit gathered together, and we dedicate, first of all, that the Buddhist teachings may flourish, that all the different religions exist harmoniously together, that all sentient beings are free from every form of suffering and have every happiness of the full enlightenment, that the gurus have long and stable lives, especially His Holiness the Dalai Lama. May all of his holy wishes be fulfilled. May Tibet quickly have religious and political freedom. May we be able to reverse global warming and end this coronavirus pandemic. And in the midst of the pandemic, may people only treat each other one another with kindness and generosity. Especially may Tushita, Dharma Center and Dharamsala continue to flourish and have all the necessary conditions, both volunteers, financial support, support from the government and so forth, and be free from any obstacles whatsoever to be able to continue offering extensive Dharma programs to sentient beings in the future. So now we can read these verses from the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. So His Holiness also recited these verses after generating Bodhicitta with us. Okay. May the blind see forms, may the deaf hear sounds, may the naked find clothing, the hungry find food, may the thirsty find water and delicious drinks, may the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy, may the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity, may all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments, and may every disease in the world never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be free. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting one another. May no living creature ever suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled, or their minds ever be depressed. If in those who encounter me a faithful or an angry thought arises, may that eternally become the source for fulfilling all their wishes. May all those who say bad things to me or cause me any other harm, and those who mock and insult me have the fortune to fully awaken. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. May a rain of food and drink descend to clear away the pain of thirst and hunger. And during the eon of famine, may I myself change into food and drink. May I become an inexhaustible treasure for those who are poor and destitute. May I turn into all the things they can need, and may these be placed close beside them. May I be a protector for those without one, a guide for all travelers on the way. May I be a bridge, a boat, and a ship for all who wish to cross the ocean. May I be an island for those who seek one, and a lamp for those desiring light. May I be a bed for all who wish to rest, and a servant for all who want a servant. And until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach into the ends of space. Just like space and the great elements such as earth, may I always support the life of all the boundless creatures, for as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain. Until then, may I to remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Okay, so thank you all for joining, and I hope we meet again soon. Please stay safe, and yeah, try to remember His Holiness advice and practice. Okay.
Thank you so much, Venerable, for this wonderful sessions, and I hope that we can have you again in the next after the next teachings. And so everyone, please join me in thanking Venerable Legtsok, and yeah, please be well.
Thank you very much. Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
so much. Great seeing you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much as well.
All right, so everyone have a good day, a good morning, a good evening, whatever it is where you are.
And thank you, Felipe, for hosting.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye bye. Have a nice.
Bye, Maya.